The golden rays of the afternoon sun reflected off the glass windows of Fairview National Bank, a towering institution in the heart of the city. Inside, the air buzzed with the soft hum of polite conversations and the clicking of keyboards as bankers shuffled through their tasks. Elijah Carter walked in with confidence, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, his sleek gold watch gleaming under the polished ceiling lights. His deep brown skin glowed under the lights, and his neatly trimmed beard framed his face, giving him an air of quiet authority. At 42 years old, Elijah was a self-made entrepreneur, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company that had recently closed one of its biggest deals. Today, he was here to finalize a major business transaction, one that would open doors to an even brighter future. As he approached the counter, a young white teller, Michael, barely looked up from his screen. He tapped at the keyboard absent-mindedly before offering a half-hearted glance. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, his tone flat and dismissive. Elijah nodded, handing over a folder filled with documents. "I'd like to make a large deposit and speak with a senior banker about setting up a corporate account." Michael took the folder, but barely skimmed through it. His expression tightened. He glanced toward the total amount in the document, and his jaw tensed. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have certain policies in place for large transactions. Do you have an appointment?" Elijah raised an eyebrow. "I was told walk-ins are fine for deposits." Michael hesitated, then glanced at another teller, Susan, who looked just as uncertain. There was a brief, unspoken exchange between them before Michael turned back. "Let me check with my manager," he said quickly, before walking off. Elijah tapped his fingers on the counter, sensing something was off. He had made larger deposits before. Never had there been an issue. He was a long-time client, but today, something felt different. A few moments later, Greg Whitman, the bank's middle-aged branch manager, emerged from a glass-walled office. With salt-and-pepper hair and a stiff posture, he exuded authority, but not the welcoming kind. Michael handed Greg the file and whispered something. Greg frowned, then looked up at Elijah, his cold blue eyes narrowing. Greg approached the counter with a forced smile. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, but we're unable to process this transaction at this time." Elijah frowned. "And why is that?" Greg hesitated before saying, "It's standard procedure for large deposits. We require additional verification before proceeding." Elijah inhaled sharply. He kept his voice even. "I've banked here for years. I have an active account. The funds are legitimate." Greg's fake smile dropped slightly, but he held his stance. "I understand, but given the circumstances—" Elijah cut him off. "What circumstances?" Greg's lips parted, but no words came out immediately. He glanced at the paperwork, then back at Elijah. He was searching for an excuse, a professional way to mask what was clear to everyone paying attention. Other customers had begun to notice the exchange. A few whispered, some cast sympathetic glances, while others merely watched with intrigue. Elijah leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, but making his words cut deeper. "You don't believe I belong here, do you?" Greg's jaw tightened, his stiff demeanor cracking. "That's not what I said." "But that's what you meant," Elijah replied. The room fell into an awkward silence. Even the security guard by the door shifted uncomfortably. Just as the tension thickened, the front doors swung open. A man in a dark, expensive suit strode in, his silver hair and confident presence instantly recognizable. Richard Caldwell, the bank's regional director. "Mr. Carter," Caldwell called out, his voice filled with warmth. Elijah turned, mildly surprised. "Mr. Caldwell, good to see you." Greg's face drained of color. His boss knew Elijah personally? Caldwell strode forward, shaking Elijah's hand firmly. "I was just reviewing your company's business expansion plans this morning. Impressive work." Greg's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Elijah kept his expression neutral, but let the weight of the moment settle. "I was just about to make a deposit," Elijah said, "but there seems to be an issue." Caldwell's expression hardened. He turned to Greg. "An issue?" Greg stammered, sweat forming on his forehead. I was just following protocol. I wasn't aware." Caldwell's gaze turned icy. "Mr. Carter is one of our largest private clients. He doesn't need extra verification. Process his request immediately." Michael and Susan froze. The entire bank had just misjudged Elijah based on nothing but their assumptions. Greg swallowed hard, then turned to the teller. "Do it. Now." As Michael hurriedly processed the transaction, Greg stood to the side, looking humiliated. Caldwell turned back to Elijah. "I deeply apologize for this, Mr. Carter. This should never have happened." Elijah's expression remained calm but powerful. "It happens more than you think, Mr. Caldwell." Greg finally spoke up, his voice lower, filled with regret. I was wrong," Greg admitted. "I made an assumption I shouldn't have." Elijah studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I don't need an apology," Elijah said firmly. "I need people to do better." Greg nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of those words. As Elijah stepped outside, the fresh air felt different, lighter, clearer. He had fought battles more difficult than this, but the weight of systemic bias was one that never seemed to fully disappear. Then his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Elijah, the new bank we discussed is ready for your approval. Let me know when you'd like to move your funds." Elijah smirked, looking back at the Fairview National Bank sign. Sometimes, the best way to create change wasn't just by proving people wrong. It was by taking your business somewhere that valued you. With one last glance at the bank, Elijah turned and walked away, his future brighter than ever.